The crack of a whip shattered the tranquility of the New Mexico Territory afternoon, silencing the murmur of the crowd gathered in Fort Sumner's dusty town square. Katherine Grayson stumbled forward, her wrists bound with coarse rope that cut into her delicate skin as a burly man shoved her onto the crude wooden platform. The year was 1872, and she never imagined she would find herself being sold to the highest bidder like cattle. Next up, gentlemen. A fine specimen of womanhood. This one can cook, clean, and warm your bed, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the square as Katherine's cheeks burned with humiliation. She had been traveling west with her elderly uncle, her only living relative, when their stagecoach was attacked by bandits outside Fort Sumner. Her uncle didn't survive the assault, and Katherine, with no money and no protection, had been seized by the local sheriff's deputy, a corrupt man who claimed she owed taxes on her uncle's belongings. When she couldn't pay, he'd arranged for this auction, pocketing what would surely be a handsome profit, starting bid at $50. The auctioneer called out, grabbing Katherine's arm and spinning her around to display her to the crowd. Katherine's vision blurred with tears as she tried to maintain her dignity. She wore her once fine blue traveling dress, now soiled with dust and torn at the hem. Her honey blonde hair had fallen from its pins, framing her face in disarray. At 22, she had been on her way to a teaching position in California, far from the gossip and painful memories that plagued her back in Boston following her parents' deaths. 75, called a gruff voice from the crowd. 85, shouted another. Katherine felt light-headed as the bidding continued. She would rather die than become property to one of these leering men. With sudden resolve, she wrenched away from the auctioneer's grip and made a desperate lunge toward the edge of the platform, preferring to risk injury and escape than face what awaited her if she remained. Time seemed to slow as she pitched forward into empty air, bracing for the impact with the hard ground below. But instead of pain, she felt strong arms catch her, breaking her fall. The world spun as she was lifted and secured against a solid chest. Through her daze, Katherine gazed up into the most intense pair of green eyes she had ever seen, framed by a sun-bronzed face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "I reckon this ain't no way to treat a lady," came a deep, steady voice that seemed to silence the entire square. The man who held her sat astride a magnificent black stallion that pawed impatiently at the ground. He wore a weathered leather duster over a simple shirt, a bandana tied loosely at his neck, and had the unmistakable look of a man who lived by his own code in this untamed land. Blackwell. The auctioneer sputtered, recognizing the rider. "This is official business. The woman's being sold to cover her debts." "What debts would those be, Harding?" the cowboy asked, his voice dangerously quiet as he cradled Katherine against him. "Far as I can tell, you're selling a woman against her will, which ain't legal anywhere I've been. She's a vagrant with no means to support herself," the deputy sheriff called out, pushing through the crowd. "The law says—" "I know what the law says," the cowboy interrupted. "And it don't say you can auction off free women." His gaze swept the crowd. Anyone here care to argue the point? The crowd shifted uncomfortably, no one willing to challenge this man they clearly knew and respected or feared. "How much?" the cowboy finally asked. $100, the deputy said quickly. Without taking his eyes off the man, the cowboy reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a small pouch and tossed it to the auctioneer. $200. That covers her debts and then some. Anyone got a problem with that?" The silence that followed was answer enough. With a slight nod, the cowboy turned his horse and rode away from the square, still holding Katherine securely in his arms. "Name's Grant Blackett," he said once they were out of earshot of the crowd. "And you, madam, look like you could use a safe place to catch your breath." Catherine's mind raced with fear and confusion. Had she merely traded one captor for another? Yet something in the cowboy's steady gaze told her he meant her no harm. "Katherine Grayson," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Blackett, but I have nothing to offer in return for your help." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Wasn't asking for anything, Miss Grayson. Just couldn't stand by watching a lady being treated like that." He glanced down at her bound wrists and frowned. "Let's get those ropes off you first. My ranch is a few miles outside of town. You'll be safe there while we figure out what comes next." As they rode through Fort Sumner's Main Street, Katherine could feel the stares of townspeople following them. Grant Blackett clearly commanded respect, or at least caution, from the locals. He sat straight in the saddle, one arm securely around her waist, reins held loosely in his other hand as he guided the stallion with practiced ease. "Who are you?" Katherine finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity despite her predicament. "Just a rancher," he replied simply. "No ordinary rancher rides into town and challenges the deputy sheriff," she observed. This drew a low chuckle from him. "Maybe not. But that wasn't the sheriff, just his no-good deputy, Harding. Real sheriff's away in Santa Fe this month." He looked down at her. "What about you? How'd a woman with your manner of speaking end up on an auction block in Fort Sumner?" Katherine briefly explained about her uncle, the stagecoach attack, and her plans to teach in California. Grant listened without interruption, his face hardening when she described how the deputy had seized her belongings and declared her in debt to the town. "Harding's been causing trouble for a while now," Grant said as they left the town behind, following a dirt road that wound through scrubby terrain toward distant hills. "Sheriff Cooper's a good man, but he can't be everywhere at once. Some folks take advantage." The rhythmic movement of the horse and the warmth of the man behind her lulled Katherine into a state of cautious calm. After the terror of the auction block, she found herself grateful for this strange rescue, even as uncertainty about her future loomed large. "My ranch foreman's wife, Maria, will help get you settled," Grant said as a modest but well-maintained ranch house came into view. "You can stay as long as you need." As they approached, Katherine saw a sprawling ranch with several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands. Workers paused in their tasks to watch their arrival, and a middle-aged Mexican woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on an apron. "Grant, what have you brought home this time?" she called, her expression shifting from exasperation to concern as she saw Katherine's disheveled state. Grant dismounted smoothly before reaching up to help Katherine down. Her legs trembled beneath her, and he kept a steadying hand at her elbow. "Maria, this is Miss Katherine Grayson. She needs a safe place to stay. Miss Grayson, this is Maria Vasquez. She and her husband, Tomas, help me run this place." Maria's warm brown eyes took in Katherine's appearance, the torn dress, the marks on her wrists, the exhaustion evident in her face, and immediately softened. "Come inside, Nina. We'll get you cleaned up and fed." She shot Grant a questioning look. "Harding was trying to auction her off in town," Grant explained grimly. "Her uncle was killed in a stagecoach robbery, and she was left with nothing." Maria muttered something in Spanish that sounded like a curse. "That man." "When Sheriff Cooper returns," she shook her head and gently took Katherine's arm. "Come, you are safe now." Katherine glanced back at Grant, who nodded reassuringly. "Get some rest. We can talk more later." As Maria led her into the house, Katherine felt a curious mixture of relief and trepidation. She had escaped a terrible fate, but her future remained uncertain. The only thing she knew for sure was that the intense green eyes of Grant Blackett had seen her at her most vulnerable moment, and instead of taking advantage, he had offered protection. The next morning, Katherine woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she lay disoriented. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, taking in the simple but comfortable bedroom where Maria had installed her. On a chair by the bed lay a modest dress, plain but clean and seemingly close to her size. A basin of fresh water waited on the washstand, along with a bar of soap that smelled faintly of lavender. Katherine washed and dressed, grateful for these small comforts after the ordeal she'd experienced. When she ventured out of the bedroom, she found Maria in the kitchen, kneading dough. "Ah, you're awake," Maria smiled. "Sit, eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." Katherine couldn't argue with that assessment. As she ate the hearty breakfast Maria provided, she asked, "Where is Mr. Blackett this morning?" "Grant is always up before dawn," Maria replied, shaping the dough into loaves. "There was trouble with some cattle last night, possibly rustlers. He and Tomas rode out with some of the men to check the north pasture." Katherine nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt. "I've imposed on his hospitality, and I have no way to repay his kindness." Maria waved away her concern. "Grant Blackett is not a man who keeps ledgers of debts and favors. He helped you because it was right, not because he expects payment." "You've known him long, 5 years," Maria said. "Tomas and I came to work for him when he first bought this ranch. He was younger than barely more than 25, but already carried himself like a man with old responsibilities. He seems respected in town," Katherine observed carefully. Maria's expression grew thoughtful. "Grant came to New Mexico territory with nothing but determination and skill with horses. He built this ranch through hard work and fair dealing. People respect that." She paused. "But not everyone appreciates a man who stands by his principles when they conflict with certain interests." Katherine sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Instead, she offered to help with the baking, grateful when Maria accepted. Working alongside the kind woman gave Katherine's troubled mind a focus beyond her own misfortunes. It was mid-afternoon when Grant returned to the ranch, his duster dusty from the ride and his expression grim. He removed his hat as he entered the kitchen, nodding to Katherine. "Miss Grayson, I trust you slept well." "Yes, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of her borrowed dress and loose hair. "Mr. Blackett, I can't express enough gratitude for what you did yesterday." He dismissed her thanks with a slight shake of his head. Any decent man would have done the same. He accepted a cup of coffee from Maria before continuing. "I need to go into town tomorrow. Sheriff Cooper should be back by then, and he needs to hear about what Harding was up to." "I should come with you," Katherine said firmly. "If there's to be any accounting of the deputy's actions, my testimony will be needed." Grant studied her for a long moment. "It might not be pleasant. Harding has friends in Fort Sumner." "I'm not afraid," Katherine replied, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. A hint of approval flickered in Grant's eyes. "Very well. We'll leave after breakfast." He drained his coffee cup and turned to go, then paused. "Miss Grayson, may I ask what your plans are once this business with Harding is settled?" Katherine hesitated. Her dreams of teaching in California seemed impossibly distant now. I'm not sure," she admitted. "I lost everything in the stagecoach attack, my uncle, my belongings, the money for my journey west. I suppose I'll need to find work until I can save enough to continue my travels." Grant nodded thoughtfully. "Fort Sumner's school has been without a teacher since Miss Abernathy married last spring. It might be worth inquiring if teaching is your profession." Hope flickered within Katherine for the first time since the attack. "That's That would be perfect, actually. I'll make inquiries while we're in town, Grant promised. With a brief nod, he departed, leaving Katherine with a curious warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. The ride into Fort Sumner the next day was tense. Katherine sat stiffly in the wagon beside Grant, her borrowed dress now neatly mended by Maria's skilled hands. She'd managed to tame her hair into a simple but respectable style, determined to present herself with dignity despite the circumstances. "Sheriff Cooper is a fair man," Grant told her as they approached town. "He won't stand for what Harding did, but Harding may have covered his tracks," Katherine finished for him. Grant gave her a sidelong glance. "You've got a quick mind, Miss Grayson." "I was raised by a father who believed women should be educated," she replied. "He was a professor at Harvard before his death." "Is that where you learned to teach?" Katherine nodded. "I attended a women's seminary in Boston. I was fortunate many girls don't receive such opportunities. And yet here you are, halfway across the country on your own." "Life rarely follows the paths we expect," she said softly, thinking of her parents' deaths from influenza 2 years earlier, leaving her in the care of her elderly uncle. The town looked different in daylight than it had during her terrifying experience on the auction block. Fort Sumner was a frontier settlement, rough around the edges but with signs of civilization taking hold: a church, several businesses, homes in various states of construction or repair. Grant drove directly to the sheriff's office, helping Katherine down from the wagon with a gentle hand at her elbow. The touch, brief as it was, sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. Inside, they found a graying man with a weathered face seated behind a desk, sorting through papers. He looked up as they entered, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "Blackett, didn't expect to see you in town so soon after yesterday's excitement." His gaze shifted to Katherine, curious but not unkind. "Sheriff Cooper," Grant acknowledged with a nod. "This is Miss Katherine Grayson. She has a matter to discuss with you concerning Deputy Harding." Sheriff Cooper gestured to the chairs opposite his desk. "I've already heard some rumors. Would appreciate hearing the truth directly." Katherine related her story: the stagecoach attack, her uncle's death, and Harding's actions afterward. The sheriff's expression grew increasingly troubled as she described being forced onto the auction block. "Harding claimed I owed taxes and fees to the town," she finished. "He took my uncle's pocket watch, my locket with my parents' portraits, and what little money we had." Sheriff Cooper sighed heavily. "Miss Grayson, I apologize for what you experienced. Harding was entrusted with maintaining order in my absence, not this." He glanced at Grant. "I assume you intervened, paid her supposed debts, and took her to my ranch for safety," Grant confirmed. "Figured you'd want to handle this properly when you returned." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Harding's been testing boundaries for months. This crosses every line." He turned back to Katherine. "I'll need your formal statement, Miss Grayson, and then we'll track down your belongings. Harding likely sold some items already, but we'll recover what we can." "And what happens to Harding?" Grant asked, his voice carrying an edge Katherine hadn't heard before. "He'll face charges," Sheriff Cooper assured them. "This isn't the first complaint I've had, just the most serious." After giving her statement, Katherine felt drained but relieved. As they left the sheriff's office, Grant suggested they visit the town council president about the teaching position. "Are you sure you want to stay in Fort Sumner after what happened?" Grant asked as they walked down the main street. Katherine could feel curious eyes following them, whispers trailing in their wake. "I have few options at present," she replied practically. "And I won't let one corrupt man drive me away from a place where I might do some good." Grant's mouth curved in a small smile. "You've got grit, Miss Grayson." The town council president, Mr. Henderson, received them in his general store office. A portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, he listened attentively as Grant introduced Katherine and explained her qualifications. "A real Boston-educated teacher," Henderson said, clearly impressed. "The town council would be delighted, Miss Grayson. Our school has been closed for months, children running wild, forgetting their letters and sums." "When could the position begin?" Katherine inquired, hope rising within her. "Immediately. We can offer room and board at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, plus a modest salary." Henderson named a figure that, while not generous, would allow Katherine to gradually rebuild her savings. "There is the matter of Miss Grayson's belongings," Grant interjected. "Sheriff Cooper is investigating their whereabouts, but in the meantime, she'll need basic necessities." Henderson nodded thoughtfully. "The council can advance you a month's salary, Miss Grayson, and I'm sure the ladies of the church would be willing to help with clothing and such, once they hear your story." By the time they left the general store, Katherine had secured a position as Fort Sumner's schoolteacher, with classes to begin the following Monday. The weight that had pressed upon her shoulders since the stagecoach attack eased slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly as Grant helped her back into the wagon. "I wouldn't have this opportunity if not for your intervention yesterday." "You earned the position with your own qualifications," he replied, climbing up beside her. "I merely made the introduction." As they drove through town, Katherine noticed a group of men outside the saloon watching their passage with open hostility. One, a thin man with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest, spat in the dust as they passed. "Harding," she guessed. Grant nodded, his jaw tight. "And his friends." "Don't worry, Cooper will handle him." "He seems to have a particular dislike for you," Katherine observed. "We've had our disagreements," Grant said mildly. "Cattle have gone missing from my ranch several times over the past year. I've had suspicions about who might be responsible." Katherine pieced together the implication. "You think Harding is involved in cattle rustling?" "I think Harding looks the other way for certain activities, in exchange for a share of the profits." Grant kept his eyes on the road ahead, but proving it is another matter. They rode in silence for a while, the landscape stretching around them in rugged beauty. The New Mexico territory was so different from the manicured gardens and crowded streets of Boston. Wide open spaces, endless sky, and a sense of possibility that called to something deep within Katherine. "Will you be comfortable at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house?" Grant asked eventually, breaking the silence. Katherine considered this. "I'm sure it will be adequate. Mr. Henderson said it's quite respectable." "It is," Grant agreed, "but after what happened." "If you'd prefer to stay at the ranch until you're more settled, that's very kind," Katherine interrupted gently. "But I think it's best if I establish myself in town, near the school. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Blackett, truly." He nodded, accepting her decision. "The offer stands, if you change your mind." When they returned to the ranch, Maria was delighted to hear of Katherine's new position. She immediately set about packing food and household items that any new teacher would need, despite Katherine's protests that she couldn't accept more charity. "Nonsense," Maria declared. "Grant can afford it, and you will need strength to teach those wild children." That evening, Katherine joined Grant, Maria, and Tomas for dinner in the ranch house. The conversation flowed easily, with Tomas recounting stories of the day's work and Maria teasing her husband about his exaggerations. Grant was quieter, but Katherine caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher when he thought she wouldn't notice. "Miss Grayson was telling me she was educated in Boston," Grant said during a lull in the conversation. "Boston? That's far away," Tomas remarked. "What brings a Boston lady all the way to New Mexico territory?" Katherine hesitated, then decided these people who had shown her such kindness deserved honesty. After my parents died, I lived with my uncle in New York. When he decided to retire to California for his health, I agreed to accompany him. I had arranged a teaching position in Sacramento. "The stagecoach robbery," Maria said softly. "Your poor uncle." Katherine nodded, blinking back sudden tears. "He was kind to take me in after my parents' passing. I'm afraid I wasn't always grateful for his efforts." "Grief makes us see things differently," Grant observed quietly. "Sometimes it's only looking back that we recognize the value of what we had." Something in his tone made Katherine wonder what losses he had endured. There was a depth to Grant Blackett that intrigued her, a complexity beneath his straightforward manner. The following day, Grant drove Katherine into town again, this time with her few belongings and the items Maria had insisted on providing. The sheriff met them with news he had recovered Katherine's locket and some of her clothing from Harding's quarters, though the pocket watch and money remained missing. "Harding claims he was acting within his authority," Sheriff Cooper told them. "But he's been relieved of his badge pending a full investigation. The mayor doesn't want this getting around bad for the town's reputation, but I assured him justice would be served." Mrs. Wilson's boarding house proved to be a tidy two-story building with a wide front porch. The proprietress herself, a plump widow with shrewd eyes, welcomed Katherine warmly, especially after learning she was to be the new schoolteacher. "We've been praying for someone to take over the school," Mrs. Wilson confided as she showed Katherine to a small but pleasant room on the second floor. "Children need learning, even out here on the frontier." After her belongings were brought up, Katherine found herself alone with Grant on the boarding house porch. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, and somewhere a dog barked in the distance. "Thank you, Mr. Blackett," Katherine said, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't intervened when you did." "Grant," he said. "My friends call me Grant," Katherine smiled. "Then I must be Katherine to you, not Miss Grayson." "Katherine," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "It suits you. Will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. A slow smile spread across his face, warming his green eyes. "Fort Sumner's not so large that we can avoid crossing paths. And I have business in town regularly." "Of course," she said, feeling her cheeks warm. "I only meant I know what you meant," he assured her. "And yes, I expect we'll see each other. Perhaps at church on Sunday." Katherine nodded, relieved. "I would like that." Grant placed his hat back on his head. "Until Sunday, then, Katherine." With a slight bow, he turned and walked back to his wagon, leaving her with the curious sensation that something significant had just transpired between them, though she couldn't have said exactly what. The next few days passed in a whirlwind as Katherine prepared for her teaching duties. She met with the school board, inspected the one-room schoolhouse, and organized what meager supplies were available. The townspeople were generally welcoming, though she noticed some whispered behind their hands when she passed, no doubt discussing her dramatic arrival in Fort Sumner. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Katherine, dressed in her best borrowed dress, now altered to fit her better thanks to Mrs. Wilson's skilled needle. She joined the stream of people heading toward the simple white church at the edge of town, her stomach fluttering with nerves that had little to do with meeting her future pupils and their parents. She spotted Grant immediately, standing tall near the church steps, wearing a clean shirt and vest instead of his usual working clothes. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and he made his way toward her. "Good morning, Katherine," he greeted her, the informality of her given name sending a pleasant thrill through her. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Grant," she replied, matching his familiar address. Fort Sumner seems to agree with me better now that I'm not being auctioned off." The corner of his mouth quirked up at her gallows humor. "I imagine so. How are your preparations for the school coming along?" As they entered the church together, Katherine was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Grant Blackett was clearly a man of some standing in the community, and his obvious interest in the new schoolteacher was noteworthy. The service passed pleasantly, with a straightforward sermon on neighborly duty that Katherine found refreshingly practical after the theological abstractions she'd grown accustomed to in Boston churches. Afterward, on the church steps, Grant introduced her to various community members. "Miss Grayson will be opening the school tomorrow," he told each person. "She's come all the way from Boston with excellent qualifications." Katherine was touched by his evident pride in her accomplishments, though she'd shared very little of her background with him. It seemed Grant Blackett had made inquiries of his own. As the congregation dispersed, Grant asked, "Would you care to join me for dinner at the hotel? The food's not fancy, but it's better than eating alone at the boarding house." Katherine hesitated only briefly before accepting. Though she was conscious of propriety, dining in the public hotel restaurant with a respected rancher was hardly scandalous, even in a small town like Fort Sumner. Over simple but hearty fare, they talked more freely than they had before. Grant told her about his journey west from Pennsylvania 8 years earlier, working as a ranch hand until he saved enough to buy his own small spread. "It was just 50 acres and a broken-down cabin at first," he explained, "but good grazing land. I bred horses on the side to build my savings, then gradually added more acreage." "You've accomplished a great deal for a man so young," Katherine observed. Grant shrugged. "I'm 31, not so young out here. Most men my age have families by now." "No Mrs. Blackett waiting at home?" Katherine asked, trying to keep her tone casual. His expression softened. "No, never found the time for courting, I suppose. Or the right woman." His green eyes held hers for a moment too long to be casual. Katherine looked down at her plate, her heart beating faster. "I was engaged once," she found herself confessing. "In Boston before my parents died, but afterward, circumstances changed." "What happened?" Grant asked quietly. "My fiancé's family had expectations about the match, a certain level of financial contribution from my family." She traced the pattern on the tablecloth with one finger. "When my parents died and their estate proved to be encumbered with debt, his interest cooled considerably." Grant's expression darkened. "He abandoned you because of money." "He was very apologetic about it," Katherine said dryly. "Explained that his family's business interests required a more advantageous match." "Then he was a fool," Grant said simply, his directness startling a laugh from her. "Perhaps," she agreed, "but at the time it felt like one more loss atop too many others." As they walked back to the boarding house after dinner, Grant surprised her by offering his arm. Katherine took it, aware of the strength beneath his shirt sleeve and the respectful distance he maintained between them despite the gesture. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked as they approached Mrs. Wilson's establishment. "A little," she admitted. "I've taught before, but never in a one-room schoolhouse with children of all ages." "You'll do fine," Grant assured her. "These children need someone who cares enough to teach them properly. That's you." At the boarding house steps, Katherine turned to face him. "Thank you for dinner and for everything." "My pleasure," he replied, his voice dropping slightly. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he simply tipped his hat. "Good luck tomorrow, schoolteacher." Katherine watched him walk away, a curious mixture of disappointment and anticipation swirling within her. Whatever was developing between them, she sensed it would require patience on both their parts. The school day began early, with Katherine arriving at the schoolhouse before dawn to prepare. She arranged the battered desks in neat rows, swept the floor, and wrote her name on the chalkboard. Miss Grayson. Children began arriving shortly after 7 o'clock, some walking from town, others riding in on ponies or dropped off by parents in wagons. By 8, Katherine faced 22 curious faces ranging in age from 6 to 16, some eager, some suspicious, all sizing up their new teacher. "Good morning," she began, summoning her most confident voice. "I'm Miss Grayson, and I'll be your teacher. I believe education is the foundation upon which we build our future, and I'm here to help each of you build yours as strong as possible." The morning progressed with evaluations to determine each student's level of knowledge. Some could barely identify letters, while others demonstrated surprising proficiency in arithmetic or literature. Katherine grouped them according to ability rather than strictly by age, creating flexible learning arrangements that would allow each child to progress at their own pace in different subjects. By midday, she had begun to learn their names and personalities: the mischievous Tucker twins, serious Abigail Henderson, whose father ran the general store, shy Miguel Vasquez, who turned out to be Tomas and Maria's youngest son. "My papa works for Mr. Blackett," Miguel told her during the lunch break. "He says Mr. Blackett is the best boss in the territory." "Is that so?" Katherine replied, hiding her smile at the boy's earnest endorsement. "Yes, madam, and Mama says you stayed with us before coming to town." Word traveled fast in small communities, Katherine reflected. She would need to be mindful of her actions if she wished to maintain her respectable position. The afternoon session was just beginning when the schoolhouse door opened unexpectedly. Katherine looked up, expecting perhaps a late student or a parent, only to see Deputy Harding or former deputy, as she reminded herself standing in the doorway. A chill ran down her spine at his cold smile. Though no longer wearing his badge, he still carried a gun at his hip, and the malice in his gaze was unmistakable. "Don't stop your lessons on my account, Miss Grayson," he drawled. "Just thought I'd see what all the fuss was about, Boston-educated teacher and all." Katherine straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Harding, we're in the middle of arithmetic lessons. If you have business with the school, please call on Mr. Henderson, the school board president." Harding ignored her, strolling into the room and examining the children's work with exaggerated interest. The students shifted nervously, sensing the tension. "Heard you been telling tales about me," Harding said conversationally, but with an undercurrent of menace. "Telling folks I stole from you when I was just collecting lawful taxes." "Mr. Harding, this is neither the time nor place for this discussion," Katherine said firmly, though her heart pounded. "Please leave. Now, or what, teacher lady?" Harding took another step toward her desk. "Your cowboy savior ain't here to help you this time." Several of the older boys stood up, led by 16-year-old James Wilson, Mrs. Wilson's grandson. "Mister, my grandma says you ain't allowed to harass Miss Grayson no more. Sheriff Cooper's looking for you anyway." Harding's hand twitched toward his gun, but he seemed to think better of it, surrounded by children who would surely witness and report his actions. With a last venomous glare at Katherine, he backed toward the door. "This ain't over," he promised. "Not by a long shot. You and Blackett both got coming what you deserve." After he departed, Katherine took a moment to compose herself before reassuring the children and continuing with the lesson. But inside, she was shaken. Harding's threat had not been idle, she was certain of it. When school dismissed, Katherine was relieved to see Sheriff Cooper waiting outside. The children scattered, but James Wilson remained behind, clearly having appointed himself her protector. "Miss Grayson," the sheriff greeted her. "Heard Harding paid you a visit today." Word travels fast, she observed. Little Tucker boy ran straight to my office, Cooper explained. Said a bad man was bothering the teacher. Katherine described Harding's behavior and threats. The sheriff's expression grew increasingly grim. I'll have a warrant for his arrest by morning, he promised. Been building a case against him for months, but threatening a schoolteacher in front of children is the last straw. He seems to harbor particular animosity toward Grant Blackett, Katherine noted. Cooper nodded. Grant's been pushing me to investigate cattle rustling for months. Harding's brother-in-law runs a ranch south of here, suddenly started prospering about the same time Grant's cattle began disappearing. He eyed her speculatively. You and Blackett seem to have grown friendly. Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Blackett has been very kind to me since my arrival in Fort Sumner. He's a good man, Cooper said simply. One of the best in the territory, though he'd never admit it. He tipped his hat. I'll escort you back to the boarding house, Miss Grayson. And I'll send word to Grant about what happened here today. True to his word, Sheriff Cooper delivered Katherine safely to Mrs. Wilson's, where the news of Harding's threatening behavior had already spread. Mrs. Wilson was indignant, insisting on serving Katherine tea with brandy for her nerves and stationing her grandson as guard on the porch, just in case. Katherine had just retired to her room when she heard a commotion downstairs. Moments later, Mrs. Wilson's voice called up to her. Miss Grayson. Mr. Blackett is here to see you. Heart racing, Katherine checked her appearance in the small mirror, smoothing her hair before descending the stairs. Grant stood in the parlor, hat in hands, his expression a mixture of concern and barely suppressed anger. Are you all right? He asked immediately. Cooper told me what happened. I'm fine, she assured him. Startled but unharmed. Mrs. Wilson discreetly excused herself, though Katherine had no doubt the woman would find a reason to pass through the parlor regularly to ensure propriety was maintained. I should have warned you, Grant said, pacing the small room. Harding's vindictive and he blames me for his troubles. Now he's targeting you to get to me. I don't understand why he would, Katherine began, then stopped as realization dawned. He thinks there's something between us. Grant halted his pacing, his green eyes finding hers. Isn't there? The directness of the question took her breath away. Katherine had been raised to approach matters of the heart with restraint and propriety, but Grant Blackett's forthright manner demanded equal honesty. I'm drawn to you, she admitted softly. More than I should be, perhaps, having known you such a short time. Time matters less out here than character, Grant replied, and I've seen enough of yours to know you're a woman of courage and principle. He took a step closer. Katherine, I don't want you staying in town while Harding's still at large. Come back to the ranch until Cooper arrests him. I can't abandon the school, she protested. The children can miss a few days of lessons if it means keeping their teacher safe, he finished for her. Please. Maria's worried sick, and frankly, so am I. The intensity in his eyes weakened her resolve. What would people say? A single woman staying at a bachelor's ranch. Maria and Tomas live in the main house with me, Grant reminded her. And your reputation is already established as the schoolteacher. Anyone who would gossip about you seeking safety isn't worth your concern. Mrs. Wilson, who had indeed found reason to dust the parlor mantel during their conversation, spoke up unexpectedly. He's right, Miss Grayson. Harding's got a mean streak a mile wide. You'd be safer at the Blackett Ranch until the sheriff catches him. Grant looked surprised but grateful for the endorsement. Katherine hesitated a moment longer, then nodded. Very well. But only for a day or two, until Sheriff Cooper has Harding in custody. Grant's relief was palpable. I'll wait while you pack a few things. My wagon's outside. Within half an hour, they were on the road to the ranch. the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Katherine sat close to Grant on the wagon seat, more conscious than ever of his physical presence beside her. "Thank you," she said after they had traveled some distance in companionable silence, "for coming to town when you heard about Harding." Grant glanced at her, the fading light softening his features. "I'd have come sooner if I'd known. Was already planning to ride in tomorrow to see how your first day of teaching went." The simple admission warmed her more than it should have. It went well, until Harding's appearance. The children are eager to learn, despite many having fallen behind during the school's closure. "And you? Are you finding Fort Sumner to your liking despite everything?" Katherine considered this. "It's very different from Boston. Rougher, less refined in some ways. But there's an honesty to life here that I find appealing. People say what they mean. Like me asking if there's something between us," Grant suggested, a hint of amusement in his voice. Katherine felt herself blush. "Yes, like that. In Boston, a gentleman might court a lady for months without directly expressing his intentions." "Sounds inefficient," Grant observed dryly. She laughed. "Perhaps it is. But there's something to be said for taking time to know one's mind before speaking it." "Fair point," he conceded. "Though I knew my mind about you the moment I caught you jumping off that auction block." Katherine's heart skipped. "And what did you know, exactly?" Grant's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, but his voice softened. "That you were brave. That you'd rather risk injury than submit to what you knew was wrong. That kind of courage is rare." "It wasn't courage so much as desperation," Katherine admitted. "Sometimes they look the same from the outside," Grant replied. "But I've seen you since then with the children today, standing up to Harding, building a new life from nothing. That's not desperation, Katherine. That's strength." They lapsed into silence again as the ranch came into view, lights glowing warmly in the windows of the main house. Maria rushed out to meet them, exclaiming in rapid Spanish as she embraced Katherine. "Gracias a Dios. When we heard about that terrible man threatening you at the school," she shook her head, leading Katherine inside. "Come. I've prepared your room and dinner will be ready soon." Over the meal, Grant related what Sheriff Cooper had told him about the case against Harding. "He's got enough evidence now to arrest him for corruption and threatening a schoolteacher. Once Harding's in custody, Cooper thinks his brother-in-law might talk to save his own skin." "And then they might find proof of the cattle rustling?" Katherine asked. Grant nodded. "With any luck. I've lost nearly 100 head over the past year, not enough to cripple the ranch, but enough to notice." "Why would they target your ranch specifically?" Katherine wondered. Grant and Tomas exchanged glances. "Likely because I've been vocal about law enforcement in the territory," Grant said carefully. "Some people prefer the frontier to remain loosely governed." Katherine sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. After dinner, she helped Maria clear the dishes despite the older woman's protests, then joined Grant on the porch. The night was cool but pleasant, a blanket of stars stretching endlessly above them. "It's beautiful here," Katherine said, drawing her shawl closer around her shoulders. "So different from the city. In Boston, the gas lamps drown out most of the stars." "I visited Philadelphia once before coming west," Grant told her. "Found it too crowded, too confined. Out here a person can breathe." "Is that why you left Pennsylvania, for more space?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. "Partly," he finally said, "and partly because there wasn't much left for me there after the war." Katherine turned to look at him, understanding dawning. "You fought in the war between the states," he nodded. "Union cavalry." "Enlisted in '62 when I was 21. Saw more than my share of fighting before it ended." "My father supported the Union cause," Katherine said softly, "though he was too old to fight." "It was a bloody business," Grant said, his voice distant. When it was over, I couldn't settle back into my old life. Everything looked different. He glanced at her. So I came west, looking for something new, found this territory still rough around the edges but with promise. And now you've built something worthwhile, Katherine observed. This ranch, your reputation in the community. Grant smiled faintly. Still building. A ranch needs more than one person to truly thrive. The implication hung in the air between them, neither willing to address it directly. Instead, they talked of other things: Katherine's plans for the school, Grant's ideas for expanding his horse breeding operation, books they had read, places they had seen. When Katherine finally retired to her room, she found herself more drawn to this complex, forthright man than ever. Grant Blackett was unlike anyone she had known in Boston Direct, where others were circumspect, principled where others were pragmatic, shaped by experiences both harsh and purposeful. She fell asleep thinking of green eyes and the gentle strength in hands that had caught her when she was falling. The next morning brought news Sheriff Cooper had sworn out a warrant for Harding's arrest, but the former deputy had disappeared from his usual haunts in town. The sheriff sent word that he had organized a search party and expected to have Harding in custody by nightfall. "You should stay here until they find him," Grant told Katherine over breakfast. "Cooper will send word when it's safe." Katherine agreed reluctantly, concerned about missing another day of school but acknowledging the wisdom of caution. With time on her hands, she offered to help Maria with household tasks, but the housekeeper shooed her away. "Go, take some fresh air," Maria insisted. "Grant must check the south pasture today. Perhaps you would like to ride along. It is very beautiful there." The suggestion was hardly proper, but Katherine found herself agreeing before she could reconsider. Grant looked surprised but pleased when she approached him in the stables. "Maria thought I might accompany you to check the south pasture," she explained. "But if it's an imposition, not at all," Grant assured her. "Can you ride?" "I had lessons in Boston," Katherine replied, "though it's been some time." Grant selected a gentle mare for her, helping her mount with strong hands at her waist. The brief contact sent warmth spreading through her body, despite the morning chill. They rode side by side across the ranch, Grant pointing out features of his property with evident pride. The land rolled gently, dotted with clusters of pine trees and cut through with a clear stream that glittered in the morning sun. "It's lovely," Katherine said sincerely. "You've chosen well." "The south pasture is my favorite," Grant told her as they crested a rise. "Best grass on the property and the view." He trailed off as they reached the top of the hill. Below them stretched a verdant valley, bordered by distant mountains blue with haze. Cattle grazed peacefully, their forms like toys against the vastness of the landscape. "Oh," Katherine breathed. "It's magnificent." Grant watched her reaction with a soft smile. "Worth the ride, absolutely." She turned to him, struck suddenly by how right it felt to be here with him, sharing this moment. Grant dismounted, then helped her down from her horse. They stood close together, his hands lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary. "Katherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion. Whatever he might have said was interrupted by the sound of a rifle being cocked. "Ain't this sweet?" came a familiar drawling voice from the trees behind them. Grant pushed Katherine behind him as they turned to face Harding, who emerged from the pines with a rifle aimed squarely at Grant's chest. "Figured you'd bring her here," Harding said, a cruel smile twisting his face. "Your favorite spot on your precious ranch, predictable Blackett." "What do you want, Harding?" Grant asked calmly, though Katherine could feel the tension radiating from him. "Justice," Harding spat. "You cost me my badge, my reputation. Got Cooper believing all sorts of lies about me and my kin." "You did that yourself," Grant replied evenly. selling stolen cattle, extorting travelers, auctioning off innocent women. Harding's finger tightened on the trigger. Should have minded your own business, rancher. Now you'll pay, both of you. Katherine's mind raced. Harding clearly intended to kill them, probably planning to make it look like an accident or perhaps blame it on Apache raiders. Out here, far from town, no one would hear the shots. "Mr. Harding," she said suddenly, stepping out from behind Grant despite his attempt to keep her sheltered. "Sheriff Cooper knows everything. Killing us won't change that." Harding's eyes narrowed. "Shut your mouth, woman. This is between me and Blackett." "No," Katherine continued, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's between you and the law now. Your brother-in-law is probably already in custody. How long before he tells the sheriff everything to save himself?" Uncertainty flickered across Harding's face. "You're lying." "Am I?" Katherine challenged. "Why else would Sheriff Cooper have men searching for you all over the territory? He has evidence, Mr. Harding. Your only hope now is to surrender voluntarily." Grant had begun inching sideways, trying to position himself for a better angle. Harding noticed and swung the rifle back toward him. "Don't move, Blackett. I'll shoot you where you stand." "Then what?" Grant asked calmly. "You'll have murdered a respected rancher and a schoolteacher. There's nowhere in the territory you could hide after that." Katherine could see Harding's resolve wavering. His plan had probably involved making their deaths look like an accident or an Indian attack, but their confrontation had forced his hand. "You ruined everything," Harding hissed, his finger trembling on the trigger. What happened next unfolded in seconds. A bird burst from a nearby tree, startling Harding. His finger twitched, the rifle discharged, and Grant lunged forward. Katherine screamed as Grant tackled Harding to the ground, the two men grappling for control of the weapon. A second shot rang out. Then silence. Katherine stood frozen, uncertain who had been hit. Then Grant rose slowly to his feet, the rifle in his hands, while Harding remained motionless on the ground. "Grant!" Katherine rushed forward. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, though she could see blood on his shirt sleeve. "Just grazed." Harding wasn't so lucky. Katherine looked down at the former deputy. The man's eyes stared sightlessly at the sky, a crimson stain spreading across his chest where the rifle had discharged during the struggle. "Oh God," she whispered, turning away from the sight. Grant set the rifle aside and drew her into his arms. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now." Katherine clung to him, trembling with delayed shock. "We need to tell Sheriff Cooper." "We will," Grant assured her, "but first let's get you back to the ranch." He helped her onto her horse, then secured Harding's body across the saddle of his own mount, leading both animals back toward the ranch house. Katherine rode in numb silence, the beautiful day now tainted by violence and death. When they arrived, Maria took one look at them and hurried Katherine inside while Tomas went with Grant to send a rider to town for the sheriff. By the time Cooper arrived with his deputies, Katherine had regained her composure enough to give a clear account of what had happened. "Self-defense, clear as day," Cooper declared after examining the scene and taking their statements. "Harding chose his path. You two were lucky." That evening, after the sheriff had departed with Harding's body, Katherine sat with Grant on the porch. His arm had been cleaned and bandaged by Maria, who had fussed over him until he'd good-naturedly banished her to bed. "I keep thinking about what might have happened," Katherine said softly, "if you hadn't reacted so quickly." Grant took her hand, his warm fingers enfolding hers. "But I did, and we're both here. That's what matters." Katherine turned to face him fully. "When I thought you might be shot, I realized something." "What's that?" Grant asked, his voice low. "That in the short time I've known you, you've become very important to me." The words came more easily than she expected. More important than propriety or caution would dictate, Grant's green eyes darkened as he reached up to touch her cheek. "Katherine Grayson, I've been falling for you since the moment you fell into my arms." The simple, honest declaration undid her completely. Katherine leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Even knowing I came west with nothing but dreams and determination, especially knowing that," Grant replied. "Dreams and determination built this ranch. They're building this territory. Why not a life together?" When his lips finally met hers, Katherine felt as though everything in her tumultuous journey west had been leading to this moment. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that matched the longing in her own heart. "Is this too fast?" Grant murmured when they finally broke apart, both breathless. Katherine smiled up at him. "For Boston, perhaps, but we're in New Mexico territory now." The next day, Katherine returned to her teaching duties in Fort Sumner, now escorted by one of Grant's ranch hands. The news of Harding's death and the circumstances surrounding it had spread quickly, and Katherine found herself the object of curious but largely supportive interest from the townspeople. The children welcomed her back with enthusiasm, though they peppered her with questions about the showdown that various embellished accounts had described. Katherine gently redirected their attention to their studies, though she did take a moment to praise young James Wilson for his courage in standing up to Harding during the confrontation at the school. In the weeks that followed, Katherine settled into a rhythm in Fort Sumner. She taught during the week, staying at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, and spent weekends at the Blackett Ranch. Grant courted her properly, taking her to church socials and town gatherings, though their deepening relationship was obvious to anyone who saw them together. Sheriff Cooper kept his word about investigating the cattle rustling. With Harding gone, his brother-in-law quickly implicated several others in the scheme, leading to arrests and the recovery of some of Grant's stolen livestock. As spring bloomed across the territory, Grant rode into town one Friday afternoon as Katherine was dismissing her students. She felt the same flutter of excitement she always experienced when seeing him, though it was now tempered with the comfortable certainty of returned affection. "May I escort you on a ride tomorrow?" Grant asked after greeting her with a chaste kiss on the cheek, the most public display they allowed themselves in front of the schoolchildren. "Of course," Katherine agreed readily. "Where are we going?" A mysterious smile played at his lips. "It's a surprise. Wear something nice." The next day dawned clear and warm. Katherine chose her best dress, a new one she'd purchased with her teaching salary, deep blue with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Wilson helped her arrange her hair, the landlady's knowing smile suggesting she suspected the significance of the day. Grant arrived promptly at 10, driving a polished buggy rather than his usual wagon. He had dressed in his finest, as well a clean black suit with a crisp white shirt that set off his tanned skin and made his green eyes seem even more vivid. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she emerged from the boarding house. Katherine blushed, accepting his hand into the buggy. "Thank you. You're quite handsome yourself." They drove out of town, but instead of heading toward the ranch, Grant guided the horses toward the south pasture where they had confronted Harding. Katherine glanced at him questioningly. "Trust me," was all he said. When they reached the hilltop overlooking the valley, Katherine gasped. Near a stand of pines, a blanket had been spread on the grass, with a picnic basket and a small bouquet of wildflowers waiting. "I thought we might reclaim this place," Grant explained as he helped her down. "Create a new memory to replace the old one." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. "That's a wonderful idea." They settled on the blanket, and Grant unpacked the basket: cold chicken, fresh bread, apple tarts, and a bottle of wine. As they ate, they talked about the future of the school, the ranch, the territory itself. "Fort Sumner is growing," Grant observed. "The railroad might come through within 5 years. It'll change everything." "For the better?" Katherine asked. "Mostly, I think. Though I hope it doesn't change everything." He gazed out over his land. "Some things are worth preserving." When they had finished eating, Grant grew unexpectedly quiet. He fidgeted with something in his pocket, then took a deep breath. "Katherine, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart began to race as he moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards," he began. "But out here, we learn to recognize what matters quickly. And what matters to me is your courage, your kindness, your determination." He withdrew a small box from his pocket. "I love you, Katherine Grayson. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. Katherine's vision blurred with tears as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Grant Blackett, I will marry you." His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. They were married a month later in the Fort Sumner church, with the entire town turning out for the celebration. Maria wept openly, while Tomas beamed with pride. Sheriff Cooper stood as Grant's best man, and Mrs. Wilson insisted on hosting the reception at the hotel, declaring it the social event of the year. Katherine wore a simple white dress ordered from Santa Fe, with wildflowers in her hair instead of an elaborate veil. Grant couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony, his voice strong and clear as he spoke his vows. That evening, he carried her across the threshold of the ranch house, now their home. Maria and Tomas had moved into the newly expanded foreman's cottage, giving the newlyweds privacy while remaining close enough to help run the ranch. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackett," Grant said softly as he set her on her feet in the front hall. Katherine smiled up at her husband, her heart full. "It feels right, being here with you." "It is right," he assured her, drawing her close. "Everything that happened, the stagecoach attack, the auction block, even Harding, led us to each other. I wouldn't change a moment of it." "Nor would I," Katherine realized with some surprise. "Though I might have preferred a less dramatic first meeting." Grant laughed, the sound warming her to her toes. "Where would be the story in that? Besides, catching you as you fell was the best thing I ever did." In the years that followed, the Blackett Ranch prospered under their combined care. Katherine continued teaching until their first child was born, a son they named Thomas, after Grant's father. She later established a small library in Fort Sumner, using her connections in Boston to secure donations of books. Grant expanded his operations, focusing more on horse breeding, which proved lucrative as the territory developed. His reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread throughout the region, bringing buyers from as far away as Kansas City and Denver. By 1880, they had added a daughter, Elizabeth, to their family, and the railroad had indeed come through, bringing growth and opportunity to Fort Sumner. The small frontier settlement was gradually transforming into a proper town, with new businesses, more families, and increasing civilization. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting, Grant surprised Katherine with a trip back to the South Pasture, where he had proposed. They rode out together, now accompanied by 8-year-old Thomas and 6-year-old Elizabeth, who raced ahead on their ponies. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" Katherine asked as they watched their children. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I fell into your arms." Grant's arm tightened around her waist. "Best catch I ever made," he replied with a grin. "Though I think we've built something even better since then." Katherine leaned into his embrace, contentment washing over her. From desperate beginnings on an auction block to this life of love, family, and purpose, It was more than she could have imagined when she first set out for the Western Territories. "I love you, Grant Blackett," she said simply. "And I love you, Katherine Blackett," he replied. "Always have, from the moment you were brave enough to jump rather than be sold. Always will, until the last sunset over this land." As their children called to them from the hilltop, eager to begin the picnic Maria had packed, Katherine and Grant walked hand in hand toward their future, a future built on courage, determination, and the love that had caught them both by surprise in Fort Sumner all those years ago.